So we have a very good panel today. The topic is Preserve, Protect and Perform, a CXO view. It's an interesting panel because we have 4 companies on the panel and 4 individuals. 2 of these companies that they represent are more than 100 years old. One of them was founded after the Great Depression in 1938, and one of them is less than 20 years old, but fascinatingly interesting as it has grown really rapidly. We have people on the panel who are coming in from Toronto, Chicago, DC, and San Francisco. We have a ratings agency on the panel. We've got a company that has an asset size. Gunjan talked earlier about a $1.7 trillion asset size. This company has an asset size of close to $4 trillion. And we have a tech company that has grown very rapidly over the last 10, 15 years and is almost an icon in the technology space. And we have an audit firm, highly respected audit firm as well on the panel. And the last thing on the representation or the diversity of the representation, we have a chief audit executive, a chief compliance officer, and a chief risk officer on the panel, along with a partner from a respected audit firm. So welcome, Eileen, from the chief risk officer at Fitch Ratings. Doug. Can you see that? Doug Watt. He's the chief audit executive and SVP at Fannie Mae. John Beeler, EVP and chief compliance officer at Salesforce. And Steve Rampado, partner at Deloitte from Canada. Please. Thank you for joining the panel. We've heard a lot over the last day and a half or a day and an hour about the challenges, opportunities, changes that are happening in the market. We heard performing with integrity. And it'll be really good to get a perspective from all of you, very diverse but very focused roles on how to govern your companies, but also how to hopefully be part of the strategy play and how to grow the company as well. So we are seeing significant shifts in the market, especially in the last couple of years. Whether it's economic shifts, geopolitical shifts, we're seeing technology shifts, we're seeing social virality, take a different shape, especially in the last year and a half, 2 years, through various incidents, events. My question really is, what, according to you, are the biggest challenges and opportunities that you see in your industries and your companies as well, as you go through these changes over the last, couple of years, and what do you see in the future as well? And I'm going to probably start with you, Eileen, because as a ratings company, you're probably looking at this pretty closely, not just for yourself, but for the world at large.
Thank you, Gaurav, and I'm happy to be here. In terms of the geopolitical and economic risks, they impact our major product. So we try in the development of that product to make sure that we're considering forward-looking views and that we're incorporating alternative scenarios in those products. But from an operational perspective, we're most worried about cyber risk and then our regulatory risk. And cyber risk is evolving so quickly and so vastly that the delivery of our product through all of our publishing, distribution, and the technology, we're trying to embed that product in the technology of others. So we face both external risks of people trying to penetrate our systems as well as the distribution on the outside. So that's one of the major risks that we're spending a lot of time and a lot of money to try to prevent. The other is, and relative to MetricStream, is our bigger challenge is our regulatory risk. So Fitch is a relatively small firm in terms of the number of people that we have, but we face 50 different regulators, and those regulators continue to expand their remit and ask us for more and more information. Our 2 largest regulators are the SEC and ESMA in Europe, and they both come at regulatory risk from a different perspective and regulatory requirements. So those are the 2 points that we're trying to address very quickly.
And Steve, given your role and helping a number of companies from an advisory consulting perspective, what are you seeing in your customer base and within Deloitte as well?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gaurav. And I'm glad Eileen mentioned cyber. Spending the last 20 years in that space, I've seen a lot. I'll take a bit of a different angle. Again, I had this conversation with a CRO recently, and we talked about the changing landscape. And if you look back and you see MetricStream, protect and performance, and it's the balance between the two of them. And quite often the debate we're getting into, the landscape is changing, new risks are always coming up, and the bar is constantly increasing, yet there's GRC tools they want to implement that are going to improve efficiency, and what leads and what lags. And quite often the answer that we've given to our clients is you've got to go first with improving risk. You've got to reduce the risk landscape, and you've got to go after that first. The efficiencies will come later, and we find with the organizations that we deal with, if you try to go in and put in a tool to build efficiencies and get all the gains you're going to get from it, sometimes you're going to go at it the wrong way. That I think the first element that regulators are looking for is the reduction in risk and balancing it from that perspective.
Thanks, Steve. And Doug, just given the size of your asset base, you might have a slightly different view of what you're looking at, but please go ahead.
Well, firstly, cyber, of course. We all have to talk about cyber. And I think it's cyber also because of the fact that we're trying to be more innovative at Fannie Mae. It's a very large institution, but what we do is pretty straightforward, right? We purchase mortgages and we provide liquidity for the housing market. What we are also trying to do is be innovative and make the customer journey, the time from when someone files an application until someone closes a loan, we're trying to close that timeline, work with our customers to close that timeline. And so innovation we're all about that, right? We're trying to come up with new techniques, new products, introduce new technology, and working with our clients. And when we do that, one of the concerns, of course, is that we have an awful lot of people companies are now, touching our systems, and we're reaching back out to them. So when we think about kind of the biggest concerns is how do we keep it safe so that we can go fast, but we go fast smartly, and you have to build the controls into that process throughout. And when you have a lot of folks who are really excited about the next new product, the next new opportunity, the next new technology, it's hard sometimes to be those folks in the second or third line to say, hold on a second, guys, let's make sure we build the right controls and understand the risks before we, jump in too fast. Because, and as Eileen said too, we also have regulators, and they're very interested in making sure that we do things the right way.
Yeah, I'd like to just add in on that as well, that I think a lot of times everybody thinks that a tool or solution is going to solve all their problems. I think really taking a hard look at your process and making sure that you have the right process in place, because if you put a bad process into a tool, you're going to have some really bad data and information that comes out of that. So getting your process right, understanding the flows correct, to make sure they're correct, then think about leveraging tools more and more.
So one of the things that's been a lot talked about, not just in the day and a half, but in the last several years, is how to bring a lot of the first, second, third line of defense together. And now we're talking about fourth and fifth line as well, with regulators and external audit firms. And it's been a challenge. I mean, we do this as part of our daily jobs, at MetricStream as well, but it's been a challenge. What are some of the good practices to bring this collaboration together? I know, Fannie Mae, for example, has really taken a strong stand and attempt to bring these elements together through a program. And given your background, Doug, from GE Capital, Capital One, and PwC as well, what's been your thinking at Fannie Mae? And then I'll address this to the others as well.
Well, if you think about, so we're in the midst of a large MetricStream implementation, right? But it's a GRC implementation. What we've tried to emphasize across the company is that as we go through this GRC process, it's not about implementing a tool. The tool is going to be the enabling technology to get there. What it's about is how we in the company do governance, risk, and compliance. Right? And that doesn't just happen in the second line with risk or in the third line with us making sure. It's really got to be at the first line. So we've worked hard to bring the first line in together to collaborate with us so that we're kind of all in this together, because the vision of things working appropriately with the first line is that the risk happens at the first line. Right? So they have to understand the risk. They have to be able to do all the important things that they do to manage that risk at the first line. And so, providing the tools by, you know, the help that we provide from the third line to the second line, providing the tools to help them to do what they need to do to own the risk and be accountable for the risk is, from my standpoint, that's vitally important. But you know, you just can't go in there and say, okay, go do it, right? Because it's a large change management exercise, and it's a large, in a lot of cases, a culture change. So you have to be able to you know, you have to get a really important senior management buy-in from all the levels to make sure that there's ownership across the organization.
And John, Michael actually in his keynote yesterday mentioned about Salesforce, you know, being like a strong icon in trying to protect, you know, the cloud, if you will, the way you've gone about it, you know, in terms of securing the cloud and becoming a company as large as you are. What's your view on, you know, how you're trying to get this to the first line, you know, your whole governance integrity practice to the first line now?
Yeah, no, I think it really starts with having a frame of reference around integrity, and we talked about that a lot yesterday, but that's very important within our organization, and I know it is to many others in the room. If you don't have, you know, your top line management, including your CEO and down, communicating strong values, for us, our number one values is around trust, making sure that we have trusted and successful relationships with all of our customers, that we invest in all of our security programs and other things that make our platform safe. If you don't have that kind of tone at the top with integrity and values such as trust, it's really hard to really get a good GRC program off the ground. And that's one thing that's really helping enable us. And I think, you know, we talk a lot about tools, and we'll talk more about tools, but again, I think getting people together to collaborate across all the lines is really important. I know a lot of companies, including ours, we use a risk committee to get together with all the lines of the business, including GRC individuals as well, to talk through what risks they're facing and going through and having deep dives around each of those risks and figuring out, do we have the right mitigation plans in place? What other mitigation plans do we need? And I think those kinds of committees and groups do a lot to supplement whatever's happening through the tools and through the discussions that result.
And Steve, again, I mean, you do this for a living, sure, you know, advising and helping companies. What's the big themes here?
Yeah, we've got one big piece of advice I would give, and I'm sure we've got many folks across all the different lines of defenses here in this room. And my biggest piece of advice and the shift that we're seeing, it's partnerships. You know, I think it's partnering with the other lines of defense. I think you're going to see gone are the days of the rigid lines of defense, the checkers checking the checkers, checking the checkers. There's a lot of audit fatigue out there. Organizations are getting very frustrated with that, and we talk about even more lines of defense coming. It's really understanding the key principle, and that's protecting the organization and getting away from adversarial relationships and, you know, all the processes and ticks in the box. And we look at GRC and a tool implementation as being a perfect way to come together and actually start to form those partnerships. Because what are you doing? You're agreeing on common taxonomy, common language, common things that you need to work together on, that starts breaking down some of the barriers between the lines of defense. And if you can do that, you'll get a successful GRC implementation. You'll have a greater kind of end goal of improving the risk within the organization without adding process after process after process just for the sake of process.
That's the beauty, where if we get the AI to work and all the other technologies, like machine learning, we're going to be able to break away from a lot of that manual audit fatigue and be able to test, you know, doing ongoing monitoring. I mean, I think that's going to be a beautiful day when that happens across the board.
So as a related, you know, takeaway from this, we've been talking about GRC for the last decade probably as mostly an assurance function, where there's first, second, third line. But increasingly we are seeing companies in the last, you know, couple of years at least, the leading companies starting to bring in performance into the equation, where it's not just about protecting or preserving, but it's also about how can risk professionals and compliance and audit professionals help with increasing the performance of the company. Aline, I'm going to go to you first, also because of your background. I mean, you've been a national examiner with the OCC, you've been a chief credit officer, so you've seen the spectrum. From all perspectives, how do you look at linking performance to risk?
So there's two aspects we're working on, and one of them is through the GRC implementation by sharing strategic objectives of the firm. And so Fitch now has 7 strategic objectives that it's trying to launch through, and 2 of those are highly related to compliance and risk. And one is effective risk management, and the other is working smarter. So we're trying to identify inefficiencies of second and third line, as well as bring in the first line, and ensure that they understand what our performance metrics are, and developing these KPIs and tracking those over time. The second piece, I would say, is related to the annual review and risk assessments with the first line, so that it's very clear as to what their responsibilities are and how they've performed in the past year, trying to embed more accountability into their line, as well as saying, identifying, here are your internal controls, how are you executing on these, how are your staff are doing against these, and building that accountability into it so that we can see the performance, and identify places that really need improvement and where we could improve either with technology or with additional training to improve the efficiencies of the organization.
And John, any comments from a Salesforce perspective?
Yeah, I think one thing that we try to do is for each of the key risks that we've outlined for the company, we have dedicated owners to those risks who are responsible for pulling together a mitigation approach. Sometimes it's through technology, sometimes it's process, sometimes it's people initiatives to reduce the level of those risks and continue to get them down to a lower level. It's kind of like there's no exact finish line a lot of times. A lot of times it's just continued maturation of the processes and enabling our risk profiles to continue to reduce. And I think it's something that we found to be effective, and we're continuing to drill down deeper at deeper levels and having risk metrics supporting each of those areas as well too.
And Doug, you talked about the steering group that you have at Fannie Mae. How do you look at performance versus just protection?
Well, we're not in the business to be risk-free, right? We could control ourselves out of business if we wanted to, but that's not the idea. That's not why anybody's here. And so you really have to be able to say, you have to take measured risks. But a lot of this, and I think one of the things that's exciting about going through a whole GRC implementation is, if you're going to go through measured risk, what are you measuring, right? What information do you have? Is it good information? Can we rely on the data? Can we use it to set our risk appetites? And that really kind of gets a whole different set of thinking within the company. Because it used to be, people go, yeah, that seems pretty good. That's, we think we're okay there. But that's really not necessarily it, right? When you can say we're operating within our risk appetite, we're taking certain risks, and we're comfortable with it. And sometimes that's a little bit difficult too, right? Because organizations, you have to say, if we do this, we could lose X. And you have to be able to say, yeah, that's what we thought. We're okay with that as long as we stay within the risk box. But I think being able to identify kind of what are those standards, what are those indicators that we're going to use to measure risk, and then make sure that we have a good understanding of that across the organization. That's when you get all the three lines working together, because you don't want to have, and as someone said, the checkers checking the checkers. You don't want the auditors coming in and saying, you shouldn't do X, when the guys in the front line say, well, nobody ever told us that, right? So you have to get everybody around the table to make sure that we're all kind of marching to the same tune.
Steve?
The one thing I would say, look, I've been in the GRC technology space since 2002, 2003. So look, what have we seen since then? Data has been increasing. The number of systems out there that will help you protect and monitor have just increased. The concept of GRC tools, everything is branded as a GRC tool. And so the big thing I would probably say, we gain the efficiencies, and we've used this tagline last year, enterprise GRC. It's actually starting to more consolidate, starting to move to more of a single tool. And obviously we're talking about MetricStream, we're seeing MetricStream, having that vision, but we see organizations where you've got so much data and systems not talking to each other. It's now starting the consolidation phase and starting to kind of move to more of a consolidated journey versus having to work between all the integrators and connectors and managing data, because we're only going to see more data and more systems. And I think organizations need to start looking at more of a consolidated view versus just buying a tool for the sake of GRC.
So Andy, who was on stage just just before our panel, he talked a lot about AI. He talked about emerging technologies that we are looking at as well from a company perspective. But as I'm talking to a lot of professionals outside, outside the company, there is also a little bit of trepidation around the advent of artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, and in the GRC profession, there's also a little bit of apprehension that are these going to take away jobs, through automation. If you look at blockchain, is the ledger concept going to lessen the job of auditors to actually do the audits, for example, right? Or AI, what's going to evolve in AI in terms of the profession itself? So I wanted some opinions, from you. We have representation from compliance, risk, and audit here. And John, I know you've played, other functions as well prior to your chief compliance officer. You've been an auditor, a chief auditor as well. You chair the board of the San Francisco chapter of the IIA as well. So just wondered, I'm going to throw this open to whoever picks it up. It's a little more provocative, but please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I actually look at all those technologies creating more opportunity for all of us in the room, right? I mean, those technologies are actually going to help simplify some of the more mundane tasks that maybe we've been doing in the past around testing and things like that, to actually creating more insights that we can use to partner with the business. And quite frankly, also serve in a much higher level of advisory capacity than maybe we have in the past. So, whether it be AI or machine learning, taking, manual steps out through RPAs, et cetera. I think all those things are going to really up-level our skill sets and give us more opportunities to create value in our organization. So I think it's an exciting time. I think a lot of people are worried about it's going to result in lots of job losses and things like that. I think it's actually quite the opposite, where we'll actually see a higher level of skill set developing over time.
Yeah, I'm with you, John. I don't think there's going to be job losses. They're going to be different jobs. And I think, one of the challenges that we have as leaders of our various groups is thinking about, what is that auditor of the future? What is that job of the future? What are those skills that we need to have so that we can take advantage of that? There's all the information. We talk a lot in our team about, an internal audit, we always talk about connecting the dots, right? Mm-hmm. Well, and what we say on our team is, you can't connect the dots until you collect the dots, right? And as we try to collect the dots, all of this new AI and everything else is just providing so much more information, so that for us to have the time to analyze that and provide our professional view on that from a risk perspective, I think it's really, really powerful, and it really helps to make us, from an internal audit standpoint, much more relevant, right? That's what we're all about, right? We want to add value. We don't want to be the checkers checking the checkers. We don't want to be those guys saying, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you didn't do that. You want the business folks to call you up and say, we'd like your opinion on this. We know you guys are smart about that. We want your view. And so being able to embrace the technology, and so that we can collect more of those dots and do that sort of analysis we need to do, I think that's when it really gets fun.
I think it's more challenging, though. I mean, you're given all this information, and your ability to evaluate it and be more forward-looking then becomes riskier. So the risk itself isn't collecting the data and evaluating the data, but really interpreting what that data means and whether the artificial intelligence is really telling you what you think it's telling you. And so machine learning is largely based on history, and we know from a credit perspective that history doesn't always predict the forward view. So it certainly makes our job from an analytical perspective a lot more challenging, and the value of our product and convincing the market that our product is valuable will be much more challenging in that environment.
Definitely analytical skills are going to be much more key, for sure, which is great.
Steve?
Look, I want to add on to what was already said. The one point I will say a little bit different, and I feel I'm old enough to actually make this comment, but I think it's also managing a bit of the hype, like having seen different technology hype cycles. First off, yes, with all the increase in data, increased regulatory environment, absolutely getting into machine learning, RPA, all these AI technologies, absolutely needed. But you're going to start seeing everything being branded that way, and essentially it's technologies we're already using. So just being a bit careful at letting kind of these AI technologies manage data, but now where you start getting into natural kind of language processing and starting making risk-based decisions, how you start to kind of take away that kind of risk sensing perspective that we typically should be providing for organizations is going to be the challenge and the balance that has to be struck as we start moving forward and are going to be wanting to be adopting these technologies. How do we kind of take a step back and manage the careful adoption of these technologies?
So we wanted to give some time to the audience as well to ask questions. With your rich experience, I'm sure there are a lot of questions. But before we go there, I wanted you to summarize one, what you're doing for your company, what's your one purpose in your role in your organization, and one advice to the audience here on what to worry about more than they're probably worrying about, and one thing that they don't need to worry about at all, that they worry about too much.
You changed that question, I think.
So, yeah, we can go, Eileen.
Okay, I'll start there. I think from a perspective, the one goal that we have in risk is to help the group and management make decisions. So one of the challenges that we have is to quantify the potential loss impact from events that have occurred to others in our industry, as well as the view that what we're doing, and how to quantify that and compare that to the cost of improvement, either through a technological improvement or a person or research or product improvement. So that's I think one of our biggest challenges in our goal. From a worry perspective, my concern is that we spend an awful lot of time, particularly on the analytical side, trying to get the right data and the exact data, and this is true in our risk quantification as well. And you can't always get to the 100% mark, so you have to be willing to make those trade-off decisions with, say, 75 to 80% of the data, and not worry too much about that exact 15 or 20% that you're actually missing, because it's probably not important. You really have to look at the big picture.
I'll throw in, I think from a challenge perspective, and I think one of the things that makes it particularly fun is trying to bring everybody together. Because for us to be successful as an organization, you have to bring everybody together. It has to be all the lines of defense. It has to be from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top. And I think that's one of the really fun things that we do. But it's really challenging because you're dealing with people. So all day long you're herding squirrels, right? You're trying to get everybody kind of along the same place, and everybody has their everybody says they has their day job, right? We all have day jobs. We have multiple day jobs. So to get everybody along and to kind of build the case, right? To build the kind of the burning platform. Why is this important? Why is this helpful? There's a lot of folks across these organizations who say, that doesn't matter to me. We're doing fine. We don't need all this other stuff. So I think one of the challenges, but also one of the fun things, is to try to get all the right people around the table and to get the buy-in. And sometimes you're going to have everybody going in the same direction, and a lot of times it's going to be like a scatter diagram. So, on the one hand, it's really frustrating. On the other hand, it's really, really fun. So I think that's fine. And I think from the worry about it, like worry about it, don't worry about it stuff, from my standpoint, we're going to get there as long as we kind of keep our our heads down and we keep going and we keep trusting the other folks around the table. We're going to get there. But there's no, like for us with the GRC implementation, everything we're doing, it's not going to happen tomorrow. We've recognized it's taking a lot longer than we think it's going to take. But that's a good thing, because it's taking longer to make sure we get it right, because it's really important. What we're doing is really important.
Thanks, Doug. John?
A couple of thoughts. One is that, I think people can get really hung up on having everything done like this year or tomorrow. I think we really have to think about, it is a journey without a clear destination. So I think it's about continuous process improvement. And one of the things that we're kind of focused on across all the different teams reporting in to me this year is we're doing a lot of benchmarking, both with, in some cases, consultants, and in some cases with other companies and our peer group, because you're going to learn a lot from talking to other companies, and that's the beauty of conferences like this as well. So make sure you talk to as many people as you can here, but even as you get back to your home base, talking to some of the companies, or you can get together with their teams and figure out what some of the practices they're employing, because there's a lot of great learnings out there, and you can share ideas and things that have worked, things that haven't worked. So I think that's a really key way to kind of go about this as well.
My worry area would be just like the changing landscape. It's continuing to change. We just don't know what's coming next and what the next new threats are. And probably combined with, again, a little bit too much reliance on technology, and it's getting that human factor back, and I'm coming from a bit of a jaded perspective right now. I'm reading a book on superintelligence right now, and really, again, it's the Terminator situation of how far can this really go, and there's part of me that does worry a little bit about that. You start, into some of the decisioning and where we're starting to do with technology and how we're not that far off from potential scenarios like that, so it's bringing back the human element. What not to worry about, it's back in, I think you mentioned earlier, John, it would be that it's the partnerships. I think it's really due trusting the people you work with. The piece of advice I was given early in my career is, not to kind of assume ill intent. I've seen many, organizations where there's the fights between the lines of defense and digging in heels and perspectives. I think just trusting that you're working towards the same goal. It's all about protecting risk for your organization, and sometimes getting stuck away from those battles and going at it a certain way and just kind of trusting that you can manage it the right way.
Thank you. And I'll open it up for questions from the audience.
Hi, can you hear me over here? Yes. In some ways, I feel like the future has already arrived. It's just not evenly distributed. When I hear the talk about advanced automation and talk to the vendors in the exhibition hall, how do you recommend that risk teams and finance teams and the first line upskill themselves in order to take advantage and roll out this technology for use broadly? Thank you.
Could you also just introduce yourself when you're asking the question for context? Thank you.
My name is Brian Lapidus. I'm with the Association for Financial Professionals.
It'd be just the first comment I will make in this, and seeing this in even organizations I'm working with. I think the first step, maybe going back, and maybe the incorrect way we do it, is it just happened in silos. The first line would go out and look at technology, and they want to procure and do it a certain way with understanding the ramifications. How are we going to audit this technology? How is this technology going to integrate into our systems? It was, again, back to a very defined lines of defense perspective of how dare they teach us how to understand our business, versus the partnership of risk being embedded into the line of defense and actually proactively working through the implications prior to a selection of a tool or a selection of the way that something should be done, versus just let them figure out how they're going to audit us later and how they're going to, catch up. I think just that dynamic would be the first thing I would suggest as a good first step forward.
I'll add something there too, if I may. I think too, there's so many tools out there, and I think that's part of the proliferation of technology, right? There's so many great tools that it's easy to kind of go jump after the next shiny object, because that looks like a good tool and that's good. It's kind of, sometimes you have to take a step back and say, what are we trying to accomplish, right? And do you need the most advanced technology? Do you need something that's going to be a massive implementation? Or, can we do things in in incremental steps? And so just kind of the old, remembering why we're here in the first place, I think is really important, because you can go down a path of saying that's the greatest tool and it's going to take us 10 years to get there, and that's not going to help you in the meantime. So I just think it's kind of, kind of having a measured view as you go through, so that you're not too, you don't forget your core mission.
Yeah. And sometimes just using like a tool or some kind of technology for a particular use case. You don't have to implement it system-wide, but try it on a small population, right, and see if it's getting you the intended results that you want, and if you're getting the right perspectives or something that is adding value to the business.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's still early in the morning. Yeah, go ahead, Bell. Sorry.
Belle Smith from Johnson & Johnson. Just a quick question. I know we talked about a lot of our organizations, new millennials, people, new employees who want to come in and they want to move very quickly in their career. Have any of you had any experience in putting anything relative to GRC, and obviously you wouldn't call it that, in your employee new hire program, so that as someone comes in the door, they're hearing things? I know we do a lot of things on integrity and quality and that kind of thing, but we don't necessarily embed in the first view when they're coming into the company of the expectation of, you know, working across groups. And I'm wondering if anyone, it dawned on me as I'm looking here, I'm saying, as I'm trying to roll out GRC, I'm coming to all four of you saying, hey, how would you like to play together? and whose, you know, taxonomy are we going to use? So, you know, it's your level of individuals that we're trying to bring together, but it's harder starting at that level, but even starting, you know, earlier as people are coming into the organization. Is anyone, you know, doing anything in that role where they're, you know, embedding it almost earlier in the process?
So I'll take that one from our perspective. In the analytical group, as you enter at the most junior level at Fitch Ratings, we do what's called a credit academy, where we bring all the young people together, I'll call them young, collectively, and they spend an entire year looking at working within their unit, but also being exposed to everybody else's unit and how that works. And so one of the suggestions just very recently was to not just keep that to the analytical group, but also bring in that across the organization so that new compliance, new risk people, audit people get exposed to that. The challenge that we have is really, again, the size. So most of the people that we hire at the junior level are on the analytical side and not across the other groups. But I do acknowledge that particularly at the middle management level is where that challenge is most, because the senior people have been there a while. They know what their job is. They know what they're supposed to do. They know they're supposed to work together. Getting them to work together is a different task. But getting the middle management together and working particularly, and I think the implementation of MetricStream for us has been one of those avenues where they're forced to work together right now as we implement it. And hopefully as they find it of value and those relationships that they're building in that process will continue and carry forward.
The one element I'll add, and Deloitte has got a white paper coming out I've co-authored on the cyber talent shortage and just the, you know, how difficult it is to find cyber talent. Let's expand that to risk talent. I think the same problem applies, but one of the big recommendations that I think organizations need to be doing a better job of, it's the job rotational kind of concept earlier on. This concept of risk professionals going through and being risk their whole career needs to change. And I think getting folks in much earlier in their career into internal audit, into other parts where they have a perspective from a risk, I think they're going to become, you know, greater risk professionals. I think our concept also of what we actually think of as a risk professional when we go to hire and go to market, and we find that we need to be much more inclusive and diverse in our thinking, in our process as we look to bring new individuals on board. But I think the job rotational aspect just needs to be done with a much more focus and attention.
Maybe Steve, a point you made with that too about risk professionals. To be really good risk professional, you have to be a good business professional, right? You have to understand risk. And so I think that's a great idea, being able to rotate through. Some companies do a great job of that. Other companies, we're trying to think about that too, just from an audit standpoint. Our audit chairman, you know, the chairman of our audit committee put that as one of our challenges is how could you get some sort of a rotation program. Challenge is not a lot of people getting too excited about coming out of the business into internal audit. So we have to give them a really good exit program too, you know, if you do that, we'll make sure you land safely.
Thank you. Yes, Shelley?
I'm going to ask a controversial question. One of the questions that I get from CEOs at times in different meetings is when you think about an integrated GRC program, and you spent time today on the panel talking about the importance of bringing people together and have a comprehensive approach, the question I get is, who should lead it? So on the panel, we have the Chief Risk Officer, Chief Compliance Officer, Head of Audit, we have all of you, right? The question I get is, which function should actually take the lead in trying to drive that across the organization? So I'm going to send a hot potato.
Okay, so I've been in a few of these conversations. Look, I'll say typically the battleground, as we sometimes define it, would be technology. Would have a perspective, and the various risk functions, risk, internal audit, compliance. You can start to, you know, kind of pull those together. I think, and quite often I have seen the chief risk officer quite often take the lead. I think this is very much a coming together moment for an organization, because quite often, and we used to use this concept of data stewardship versus data ownership, and the concept of data. Typically what has happened is technology has had the data reside in the system, and they've kind of owned the data, but end of the day, it's a business decision, and risk is a business data, and risk is essentially a business function. And so if technology and so the CIO and the chief risk officer, if they can really come together, it's a moment where they can actually really take the organization forward. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily one leading it. I actually, from my perspective, love it when I see the dynamic of tech and risk coming together, working together.
But I'm waiting for the answers from Doug and from John.
You want to go first, Ellie?
I'll go first. I think it's an evolution. So at Fitch, we grew up as a rating agency, and that still remains our predominant business. We only I'm only the second chief risk officer, and the position was only established 3 years ago. So it initially started with a regulatory function where we had to create a group credit officer function to manage the risks in the rating agency. And then that grew off into a requirement to have a compliance officer, which we actually are still in an evolutionary stage. At Fitch, talking about rotation, a lot of the original risk people came from the analytical side. But as we grew and expanded, we decided that's not really the best evolution to follow. So now 2 years ago, we hired a new chief compliance officer from the financial services business. And we're doing more of the external as our risk expands and as the company expands into new product and different legal entities. We're needing to add additional people and different perspectives. So to your point, though, I think implementation of systems like this can flounder because you have too many chiefs and not enough Indians. And so that part of that, though, and the reason we're doing the implementation came from the initial chief risk officer at Fitch. So it is an evolution. Compliance does own a vast majority of the system at the moment because that's how it's being implemented and involved. But as we expand as an organization, we hope to add on other modules and have some of that risk then shared by more operational focus.
I'll throw in from our side. This program started formally before I got to Fannie Mae. I've been at Fannie Mae a little under 2 years, and it started a little ways before that. But the way we structured it was, the 3 executive sponsors are risk, compliance, and audit. So I'm one of the 3 executive sponsors of the program. The bulk of the work and where the program is run out of is from our risk group. That's where the heavy lifting is happening. But there's a tremendous amount of support that comes from audit. There's a lot of support that comes from compliance. And so it's a joint effort there. But of course, from a technology standpoint, we can't do it without the technology. So that's it. But I think also the who should own it is an interesting question because, I said this earlier, but, this is about how the company does governance, risk, and compliance. So the ownership is the senior leadership of the company across the board. There's no doubt about it, because this is not about a program, this is not about a project, this is not about a technology. This is about how we do what we do every day and do it in a safe and sound manner. So I think from that standpoint, and as I think about it now, as I reflect now from your question, probably we should have or could have done a better job of getting the first line ownership and buy-in and engagement right from the very beginning. Because for this to be successful, they're the folks who are taking the risks, so they're the folks who are on the front line, so we really have to get them in the fold. And the challenge we're seeing right now, because this is taking us longer than we thought, is that the first line folks are like, we're fine. We're doing our stuff, we're fine. So bringing them in. So I think ownership is everybody, but it ultimately is the senior leadership.
Yeah, I think I've seen it distributed in a lot of cases as well. I think ultimately the technology is owned by the IT group, and I do agree with your point about bringing in the business first line sooner. Mm-hmm. We've been doing that as well as we've been adding on additional people into the tool, and we probably did some initial evaluation of the business, but we could have done more and got them more embedded into the process a lot sooner. So I don't think there's one answer that fits all.
There's no grand poobah of
No.
GRC.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not to answer the question, Shelley, but as we know, we are seeing differences in different industries as well. You look at banking, it's slightly different where, ownership sits, is different. In fact, many industries, we don't even have a chief risk officer yet. It kind of, flows from different organizations, and there's not a formal chief risk officer. In fact, I don't know if MasterCard is in the room. We were talking the other day that, they don't have a chief risk officer because the CEO feels that, risk has to be embedded into the first line. It has to be embedded in the product design, and therefore the ownership is coming more from the security side of the world because they're looking at data in a big way. So, any other questions? Yes, at the back.
Yeah. Hi, I have a question here. So my name's Chung, and my manager Michael's here too. We are from New York City pension system, and we are very new in this GRC world, and we just initiated this enterprise risk management program in our organization, and I want to get some your perspective on what are the first things we can do here with just two of us, and we are at ground zero. So what are the first concrete steps that we can take to, really starting this program going? And my second question is, we do have our internal audit department and compliance department. So if you can, how would you distinguish enterprise risk management, compliance, and internal audit? Because have a very clear understanding of the three different functions would really help us to collaborate with the two departments that we already have and create the GRC program and mature it. So thank you.
Maybe I'll step in.
Yeah.
Having helped a number of different clients, I'll take the first question. I think one of the first things you could do, and I found this was a bit of an aha moment. It's building a bit of that current state. So if you actually start to take a sense of within your organization, for whatever industry, all the different reports and compliance and things that you need to do, and then you start actually understanding how, essentially what you're going to get, the end goal is a spaghetti diagram of all these processes and things happening all over the place. I find just the developing a current state understanding of what you currently do, so you understand all the people involved, all the steps, all the reviews, all the documents, all the duplicate information, all the potential rooms for errors is eye-opening. And then start to get a sense of now, again, not that technology is a silver bullet solution that's going to fix it day one, but you're going to implement a GRC tool now to start to go down that journey to actually simplify, improve protection. So my answer to that question would be actually developing your own current state is an eye-opening exercise that you can then use across the businesses as a bit of a justification for moving forward down the GRC journey.
I would just add that if you look at the compliance and internal audit functions and their scope, start to get them to talk to each other about what they're doing in the next year and how they're going to do it. And once they share those audit perspectives and compliance testing perspectives, they can often find areas of overlap, things that they're already doing that the other one might already be doing. And by looking at the systems together and the processes, they can then say, well, okay, if you do that this year, I'll do it next year, and get a different perspective on that as well.
Last couple of questions.
Hi, Seb Pismos from BNY Mellon. So we're also on the GRC journey, and it's sponsored by Audit Risk and Compliance, and it's actually led by started off with the Chief Risk Officer, so very similar to what Doug was saying with Fannie Mae. So as we are engaging the first line of defense, and we've been doing that from an early stage, and as Doug also mentioned, it's like there are a lot of squirrels running around there. I wanted to get your insights or thoughts on the optimal construct, optimal organizational construct for the first line of defense that could help not only the organization, but the GRC journey?
I'll throw in one quick thing. In our world at Fannie, we have what are referred to as FLIBs, which are first line in business risk people. And from our standpoint, I think one of the things that we're thinking about is the importance of, it's great to say this is how we're going to do governance, risk, and compliance in the company. And then we say in the first line, you're accountable, right? You have to make sure you're doing all things the right way. Well, how do you actually do that, right? And who's going to do it? And do you have a risk function within the first line, within your various businesses, or risk people who can carry out the things we have to do, the risk and control self-assessments and tracking issue status and doing all those other sort of things you have to do, and also just keep an eye on the key indicators and such. And so one of the things that we're looking at is what is the right structure of those people in that first line? What is the right structure for the FLIBs? How many people should we have? What should they do? What are the skill sets that they have? Because I think, again, if you really, from my perspective, right, sitting in the third line, I have this vision of what I refer to as autotopia. And autotopia is that, risks and controls are managed so well in the first line, and then overseen and aggregated so well in the second line, that in the third line we have a pretty easy job, right? And that's, and that truly is autotopia. That will work out well. But it all starts, I think, with the first line and getting the right people in the right place doing the right things.
Yeah, I think it's about identifying those liaisons in each parts of each of the different first-line functions, and having people that are passionate about the GRC program and that have this as part of their responsibility to be able to execute and help you out along the way. I think that's really what it's about, is identifying those individuals.
We've actually found that it comes naturally.
It does,
because you get the head of finance or the head of business relationship management, and you start talking to them about the information you need or the processes, and they immediately point you, well, this person over here can answer your questions. So that person over there is the one that you want to get to know better and involved in, and what do you do and how do you do it. And even though you might have the very senior person approving and attending your meetings, generally those meetings expand because their first in command is the one that really gets involved in the system.
And there'll be champions and help proclaim this across the organization to help out, get more of those champions out there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We are almost out of time. In summary, the key takeaways I heard from you after the 50-minute conversation we've had is, one is don't try to be perfect. Aline mentioned that. You can overanalyze things. Don't try to be perfect. Bring everyone together as much as you can. We heard from John that don't try to rush everything. This year now has to be done. It'll take time, the GRC journey, so take the time. And then we heard that be prepared for change, because there's change coming everywhere. Adaptability and change is going to be critical. And the last was a new word that I heard today is autotopia. Okay, so where the third line, can do very little work, and yet the company will be assured. So thank you very much, for all the discussions here. Thank you for being great sponsors, not just for your own companies, but for MetricStream and also for the industry at large. And I'm sure some of you are going to be interacting with the audience, later as well. So once again, thank you everybody, and thank you panelists.
Thank you.